Well, hey everyone. Welcome to Digging Deeper. Know your eyes and ears do not deceive you. I am not Tim Sorensen. I'm Tyler, if you didn't know. Tim is getting a much-deserved break from his Digging Deeper duties. Thank you, Tim, for trusting me to host this episode. Please don't turn off your YouTubes just yet. I think today is going to be an awesome episode with some awesome dudes here. We have Joe and Austin and Mark, my dad. And we're going to be talking about tribalism. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Oh, man.
All four of us made it through the weekend teaching, I'm told.
Just barely.
Just barely, right?
Rogue River barely, man.
It was hot outside. So you guys are outside. You guys are kind of indoor, outdoor.
Yeah, man.
Downtown, full AC.
Do you guys have AC?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
In the barn.
In the barn. It's a barn. So
all the doors
How much
open?
AC can you have?
Does Brian ever get nervous about the cost of the doors
No,
constantly open?
man.
No, huh?
That's-
It's just
no,
who cares?
no.
You just bill Redwood.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It was hot.
It was
It
hot.
was hot. I'm getting over COVID, and man,
That's still a thing?
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, it's making a resurgence.
Resurgence. And so outside was hot, and everyone else was in the shade except me, I feel
Yeah.
like.
That's the way
But
it is,
I
man.
took one for the team.
That's right.
I heard you did too.
You're a
were
servant.
So sweaty.
Oh, I was pitted out, man. It was not good.
And he went for like an hour.
48.
Poor Rogue River.
You reap what you sow.
Serves you right.
Next week, Rogue River's got like 20
Self-created.
people. Like, forget this.
Self-inflicted.
Last comment on this, but I feel like at Rogue River, I've heard that people huddle up against the side of the church
Yeah.
building because that's the only shade you
Yeah,
guys
we have no shade, man. We have no shade. And
Brutal.
so it's actually kind of funny. At the end of service this week, there were some people in our church that said, all right, listen, this is too hot. What we're going to do is we're going to get here early, and we're essentially going to make Tent City. And we're going to have
Yes.
things set up, and people are bringing tarps and bungee cords, and they're going to just
no.
patch together this
no.
completely weird-looking
Someone
hillbilly
take a picture, please.
redneck setup free of shade.
It's all going to come down in the middle of your message.
It probably will, It probably
Stiff
will.
wind.
Someone
Cord
film it.
snaps.
That is awesome.
Yeah, man. It was good.
Well, speaking of tribalism, I learned something troubling about Austin yesterday.
Oh, boy.
You see, my favorite soccer team in the English Premier League, Arsenal,
Yep.
that's Arsenal. Recently, Austin chose a team to support in
They
the
did.
English Premier League. And wouldn't you know, Austin chose a team called Tottenham Hotspurs,
Yep.
which incidentally is Arsenal's biggest, most hated, and most despised rival.
It's true.
So
Whoa.
I think Austin did it on purpose. I'm assuming ill will. I think he knowingly chose my team's biggest rival to get under my skin. And,
I would too.
Yeah, and
Well, I'm glad it's working.
And all my tribalistic impulses are kicking in.
Yeah.
Please pray for our relationship.
I will
guys.
say I don't know hardly anything about Tottenham. I pretty much picked them for a few reasons. Number one, I don't know what a Hotspur is. That's their
Who knows?
mascot or whatever. And number two, it was because when we were going to go to London, but then that thing, COVID, blocked out our thing. We were going to go look at a Tottenham game because they had the cheapest tickets, which probably indicates that Arsenal's better because I imagine their tickets would have been more expensive than Tottenham's.
Probably. So anyway, that's where we're at. But
So you two are like tribal against
Oh,
each
yeah,
other.
we
You're saying.
can't stand each
we
other.
have this tribalism thing going on, but hopefully by the end of this episode, we'll still be united in Christ. We'll see. We'll see.
Not at all.
But yeah, guys, tribalism. Wow. Like so many of these complicated, confusing topics, we need definitions. I think that's been one of the more valuable parts of this cross-cultural series is just defining, clarifying where are we at, what's this about, what are our terms? Let's define what's going on here. So, what are some of the definitions of tribalism that you guys came across in your teaching and study? Because there's about as many definitions of tribalism as there are tribes.
Well,
so what were some of the definitions you guys came across?
It's interesting. I was talking to some people ahead of time, and they were asking, "Hey, what's the sermon for this week?" And it seems like every week, out of all the series we've done, this sermon series in particular has had anticipation and people genuinely curious. What are we talking about next week?
Yeah.
What hot button issue are you guys going to go after? And I told people tribalism, and some of them are like, "What in the world is that?"
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those interesting topics where people may be fuzzy on the definition of tribalism, but everybody knows what it is. So the definition that I kind of used in my lesson came from Thaddeus Williams in his book, Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth. And he writes this, quote, "Tribalism is the idea that we should divide people into group identities, then assign undesirable or evil traits to that group in such a way that we don't see the unique image bearers of God before us." I like that definition. I think that's really good. That is much more of probably a biblical a biblical definition of tribalism, but I think it's very helpful and it adds good clarity to the topic itself. So that's what I use this
So
weekend.
dividing people up into groups and in a way that kind of demonizes them,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, yeah. And so some of the examples, we are white, we're good, they're black, they're bad. We're Democrats, we're caring, they're Republicans, they're heartless, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yep.
How about you guys? What were some definitions that you came across?
Same one for
Same
me.
one.
I think Williams hits it pretty accurately there. And just this whole idea of, like critical race theory, which sort of is connected, I think, to tribalism in that everyone's sort of lumped into two groups, oppressor and oppressed. And, you are then a part of that particular oppressed group or oppressor group. And so that's kind of how tribalism can be its most ugly, where it has nothing to do with your personal character or your lifestyle. It has everything to do with what your group identity is. And so you just get lumped into that particular group. And then, typically villainized for it.
Yeah, I like what you turned me on to, Tyler, in our studies. You said, hey, check out David Brooks's work. And I think David Brooks, the New York Times, if I'm not mistaken, he had I don't know if you guys read a great article about tribalism. And it's probably a few years old. But I loved his quick one-line definition. Communities based on things you're for, and tribalism is the connection based on mutual hatred.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just a quick, it's an idea of, we're together, but what's what we're against and not what we're for so much sometimes. And I think that was something I could see seeping in pretty quickly. And I like that definition. It was easy for me to understand, at least.
I have that quote here. David Brooks says, community is a connection based on mutual affection. Tribalism is connection based on mutual hatred. The community based on common humanity. Tribalism, a common foe.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So he essentially equates, because that's one of the, Joe and I were talking ahead of time, that's one of the interesting things about this discussion of tribalism is that there is, and I think we're going to get into this later, but there is definitely an undertone to where we can't escape tribes. It's a part of society in such a fundamental level. I mean, each and every single one of us are a part of some type of group of group. I mean, even look at our church. We're all a part of something that we could identify as. And so that's an interesting kind of way to kind of split the definition there, that tribalism would be a group that is not good. Community would be a group that is good. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Sure.
Right, yeah. So, for him, tribalism would be you're united by a common hostility, hatred, anxiety, or fear. Versus community, united by a common affection, love, or fascination. So, maybe overly simplified, but a helpful way, perhaps, to think about, the difference. Like tribalism, bad; community, good.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You have to set your own. You have to set what the definition is to it, because some people could say tribalism, it can be a good thing, but if you put the ism on it, then for some, and I think I'd probably land in this camp, if the ism's on it, that automatically makes it's shifted into the negative.
Sure.
Something tribal, which is very much a people issue. Families are tribal, teams,
Cities, countries,
schools, churches. It's part of being human. God has created us to connect. I think we're going to talk about that, to be in community. But there's this thing called the fallen, sinful nature, and you throw that into community, and then you get a tribe, you get a mob, you get you get a hate group, you can get an abusive church, because it's the sinful human nature that causes us to act out in a way that misses the good point of the tribe.
And that's a good point. So one of the questions here was, can tribalism ever be a good thing? And I guess often this does come back to our definitions, right? Here's a dictionary definition of tribalism. The behaviors and attitudes that stem from strong loyalty to one's own tribe, group, political party, or church. So by that definition, strong loyalty, not necessarily a bad thing. You guys want to comment on that? Can you envision tribalism being a good thing, or do you want to clarify that at all?
I think I would say tribalism is not a good thing. I think I agree with you, though. To be a tribe or to be a community can be good. I mean, a generous definition, I would say, in that dictionary.com or whatever. To me, though, what we're addressing in the sermon is the idea of something that's against the way of Jesus. So that's therefore not the way of a follower of Jesus. It shouldn't be something we should be like, oh, this is a good thing. It's okay to be tribalistic. I'm not sure I would agree with that idea. Now, if you say, Joe, let's go be a tribe that's following Jesus, I'd say yes. So there is that ism thing, like you were just saying. I think that's where I get hung up. I think the idea of tribalism just has like a quick knee jerk, like, no, that's not what I want to be about. So I would probably say no, but you could probably talk me into it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, you just have to choose how you're going to define it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you want ism to mean good and bad, then great. You just have to define the bad versus the good. But I think ism isn't typically a positive ending to many things.
Yeah, we're getting into a semantic battle, I think.
True.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because any way you define it, there's going to be good and bad. I kind of make the case in my lesson that there are good tribes and there are bad tribes. Whether you it gets down to the specifics. And I think, again, in this whole discussion, being specific, this whole series, this whole cross-culture series is so important about getting specific. Define the terms. What are we saying and how are we saying it? Because, in one sense, in my lesson, I definitely made the case that you can be a part of a good tribe. You can make the case, according to dictionary.com, that our church would be defined as a tribe. I love our tribe. I think if River Valley is a tribe, it's a darn good one. If the church at large is a tribe, I think it's a darn good one. Sure, there's flaws in it, and there are parts of it that aren't necessarily great, but it's a tribe I want to be a part, and it stands for a lot of good things, and it goes against a lot of bad things. I have no problem with that. But I think it's when you get to one extreme or the other extreme is when the ism part probably starts throwing or starts revealing itself a little bit more powerfully and poignantly.
Well, even the worst of tribalism, I think you could argue, comes from a good tribe, like female, male.
Sure.
It's not a bad tribe. We are male, so there's a sense in which we share in that identity. It's a group identity. Nothing wrong with that. Race, like that is a tribe.
Yeah.
But when it becomes like this is most important and it is fueled by unbiblical fuel, then that's where it becomes tribalism.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of the things Thaddeus Williams points out in our book about how tribalism, the negative, by his negative definition, it comes from a God-given desire that we all have for community, for connection. And he tells those sobering stories of Christian Piccolini Connor Barnes, right? These guys that got caught up in far left or far right, neo-Nazi or Antifa-like groups, and the reason was they didn't have community, they didn't have connection, they didn't have a good tribe, they didn't have places where they could really connect with people. So I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on how tribalism is a warped, like a warped God-given desire, like a good thing that God's given us that we twist and gets corrupted. I just remember Thaddeus pointing that out, and it's like, we were designed for community. It's not good for man to be alone. But the enemy takes that, and human sin takes that and divides us up into all sorts of hostile groups. So I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting, I think, little point of discussion. It is really cool to think about that, and I made this point in my lesson, that it doesn't matter what tribe you are part of, because I think we can all make a really good case that every single person is a part of some kind of tribe, even the person who says, no, I'm an anti-establishment, anti-authority
and he has all sorts of friends.
Yep, and you have all sorts of friends that are the same way. I'm anti-Facebook, I'm anti-iPhone because of the bugs and the bots. Well, good news, you're a part of the anti-bugs and bots group. That's your tribe. And so any way we slice this cake, I think in the end, every single one of us is going to agree on one fundamental thing, and that is that we're all part of some kind of group, whether we like it or not.
We should be.
Yeah, and we should be. And so with that, I do think it's something to discuss, because that is a point of discussion that I actually think can lead to a gospel interaction, because when we see fundamentally that every single person, whether they're far right or far left, is in their innermost being is longing for a sense of belonging, that can indicate that there is a God-given desire in that person, a Genesis 2 type desire to be in community that can be redeemed by the Lord and hopefully placed into the right kind of tribe or the right kind of community or family. And so, I think Thaddeus Williams does a really good job actually in his book kind of outlining that very point.
Well, not just identity, but religion.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because
purpose, significance.
Because really, without Jesus, we're going to worship something.
Yep.
And because we're wired as worshipers. So I think tribalism becomes sort of the perfect, terrible, but perfect storm replacement for the true God. Because, we're going to then make it all about the environment. Not bad, but they can turn into worship, right? Or we make it all about, some social justice issue. Maybe a good thing, but we like women's rights when it comes to abortion. That it becomes religion. It's just like, this is what I exist for. So it's not just identity based; it's cause and worship based, and it even fuels a self-righteous. Hey, I'm worthy because I'm really fighting for this particular cause. So that's good. I think it's just important to see
There's
that nature
there,
of it. Yeah, that it's worship along with an identity to plug into.
That's good. Yeah, the place that religion or worshiping God used to occupy, that gets filled with all sorts of things, and tribalism is a huge example of that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
political party.
Totally.
It's so easy to worship. Just look at the election cycle. You know what I mean? It gets pretty crazy.
That's a great segue to this next idea of what are some examples of tribalism that we see. We've mentioned some of them. What are some examples of tribalism in the church, in broader culture, in history? As you guys are thinking, I read this sports article in Mexico City. Let's see, this was in March. At least 22 people were injured, including 2 critically, on Saturday when fans brawled during a soccer game in central Mexico. So fans just got out of control, and most soccer games occur on Sunday. It's that replacing religion for a lot of people. There's this fervor, and I just thought that was crazy. 22 people injured, and maybe you guys read about the Rams, the Niners fan who attacked the Rams fan who he was in a coma.
Yeah, saw that.
So that's one example of like sports,
Sure.
like the
Oh,
tribalism of that. Now, granted, lots of alcohol is usually involved in these sorts of altercations, which that doesn't help tribalism either. But so sports is kind of a funny example, but still kind of troubling. Everywhere from these fights and fans to parents yelling at refs at their kids' soccer games.
Sure.
What are some other examples of tribalism that we see?
Yeah, I talked
around
about
us?
that this Sunday a little bit, like what does it look like in our lives? Because I sat with the question as I was studying, because when I'm studying for a sermon, I don't know, I do a really poor job maybe of like executing of what I studied. I probably more sit with questions and I just expound upon those questions the Lord asked me as in my studies. And one of the questions was, Joe, how are you tribalistic? And one of the first ones was, I'm a University of Michigan fan, but I'm really against Ohio State. I don't even like to say their name, right? And so I talked about the kind of silly, that was one of the first things that came up. I'm against Ohio State, kind of to the sports analogy.
Yeah.
But then I was thinking back, and where have I been tribalistic in my life? And I had to be honest with the Murphy group. I was like, I have been tribalistic towards the LGBT community often. I want to say I'm against them more than I'm saying I'm for the way of Jesus.
Right.
I'll become tribalistic in a way sometimes. And I think I'm growing in that area, especially in the last couple of years. But I would say in not the far distant past, it was like, man, like I stand against that. I stand against the agenda. I stand against what's happening in our schools. I stand against what's happening for this next generation. And I would say, like, identify with what I'm against, not what I'm for.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's been kind of a sobering, like, man, I need to make sure I'm not being tribalistic towards any people group, even if I can't empathize completely with what they struggle with or with where they're sitting at. So I think that's an example I think we can easily get caught up in, especially in the church.
That's a great example. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? From when we were so little, depending on your upbringing, that we're taught hate the sin, love the sinner.
Sure.
And so much of this struggle in the Christian realm, being tribalistic, is an inability or lacking the balance to really love people, even though we can set ourselves apart to be holy from behaviors and lifestyles and ideologies, but how do we at the same time communicate incredible compassion and love like Christ for all people? And I think that's a difficult balance, right?
Sure.
And I think it's hard for people, like even when you talk that way about being compassionate and reaching out and being inclusive in your love for people, that it's so easy even for Christians to think, oh, you're selling out because you're not condemning it. In other words, you're not condemning them. And that's that's a difficult balance, but it's very, very important in our lives, because then that's where you get into so many tribalism within the church, where they're of this political association, so I just look at you a little bit differently, or you know what, your view on COVID and how you didn't wear a mask anywhere, or you wore a mask everywhere, or you got vaccinated, or you didn't, or and so now those are debatable positions to take. Agree to disagree, but it just devastated the church when it came to divisions on these particular schooling your kids, public school, homeschool, Christian school, some other option. Those are good talking points. They're all valid options. They all have problems as well. I'm not trying to make an equal case for all three, but that's another example. If we get tribalistic,
Right.
Pedersen's and us, we agree the same on this, so we can hang out together,
Exactly.
But I hate Michigan and Ohio State.
Right, there you go.
But I still love you.
Okay, fair.
Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right?
There you go, yeah.
Austin, any examples come to mind?
Yeah, so a few things. This is such an interesting discussion because I think there is a standard. There is a standard of truth.
Sure.
And
Right, absolutely.
I don't think that we can devalue that there is right and there is wrong. There is absolute truth.
Right.
And to squabble about things that are questionable can at times be distracting. And I talked about that a little bit in my lesson this week. It can be distracting. But at the same time, so like Joe, in your example, and I don't mean to be the interviewer here, but like specifically in your ways of being tribalistic towards the LGBT community, what did that look like specifically in your life? Because and the reason I'm getting at that is because I think it's important to be specific. It's important to identify things because I don't want to take on the mantle of oppressor when I'm not. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to play like I'm guilty for something that is not there. And oftentimes the reason I'm even bringing this up is because sometimes I think Christians will flip this around and act like they're guilty for something when they were actually pursuing something that was true. And I don't want to apologize for truth. I don't want to do that. I do want to apologize for the way in which that truth has been expressed poorly, and the way in the manner in which. But I do not want to apologize for saying that I believe in a traditional view of marriage that is between a man and a woman. I'm not sorry about that because I believe that's God's best. And so I'm not. So I guess specifically, what does that look like? Like specific examples of what that tribalistic attitude may look like against one political party or the other, because it's kind of like this philosophical concept that's kind of floating in the ether, but specifically in life, what does that actually manifest itself as?
Yeah, I think it's easy though for me to, and it made some of the upbringing, some of it just the way I interpret Scripture, because I agree with there's absolute truth.
Sure.
The Bible is our authority. Period. Now, how do I treat people, even though I know truth, how do I treat people who don't hold to that same authority or same structure? Is it a me versus them? Is it, it's the church versus the unchurched or the LGBT community? And so I think sometimes, depending on your echo chamber, which maybe we'll get into, you can easily get suckered into like, it is us versus them. It's the church versus the LGBT community. And then it just becomes standoffish. Now I see someone who struggles, or a young person comes in, or I meet them, and I'm like, you're one of them.
Sure.
And when that kind of language enters my head, I'm being tribalistic.
Us versus
It's us versus them attitude.
I got you.
And it's not even like I'm out loud saying anything or saying like, high five, bro, you're gay. That's not it at all.
Yeah.
It's, no, I see you as an image bearer of God's creation. Like, I still value you. Like, why do I think us versus them at all? I think that us versus them attitude easily creeps in, especially when there's a bigger crevasse between us, you might say.
No, I appreciate that, and I can see that in myself as well. Maybe at times where, like in youth group,
Sure.
in that context of seeing maybe a student come in that you can just tell from the very onset, or maybe you see stuff that they post on social media. There can be almost this, and I've experienced this as well, just sort of like this ideological divide where you think it's not even going to be worth my time or discussion to go there with this person because they're going to write it off immediately.
They must be this way.
They must be this way
Right.
because of the way I perceive them. So that's a good example. Yeah.
Usually us versus them thinking too comes with it. The us is superior.
Right.
Right? The us is better than the them.
Right.
And not
I'm
just,
better than
not,
you.
Not just
Sure.
right, but better. Morally, or not just morally superior, but that I'm a better person. That I'm.
And I guess that's the thread that I think is interesting, because let's talk the pro-choice or pro-life thing right now. Right now, that's a hot topic on social media. That's a big topic everywhere. I believe that the better view is a pro-life issue.
Yeah,
you can say that might be tribalistic. Me having the belief and the firm stance that being pro-life is a better view isn't necessarily insinuating that I also believe I'm a better person.
Exactly. That's the
Sure.
distinction
Yeah.
I'm trying to make. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
It's that we can believe in an absolute truth, but also simultaneously have the humility to recognize that just because we believe something is true doesn't make us this morally superior, pompous version of a person to where we can then shame people and go, you're a lesser version. And that's, again, going back to this very fundamental thing, Genesis 3, if we're going to talk about group identity, at the very core of our human existence is one big group identity, sinner. Sinner.
Well, image of God and sinner.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
And
the
it's
two.
like, I think when it comes to tribalism, if we're a part of any tribe, it's that of a human who is depraved, who's in desperate need of forgiveness.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so, but yeah, I do think that's an important distinction, that we can have better ideas,
Oh, yeah.
better beliefs, but simultaneously not have to repent for sharing those beliefs.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think we get into this Pollyanna when we think, oh,
Polly who?
it's sort of like this attitude that if we just were more loving, like Austin says, held our scriptural convictions, we don't budge there, but if we're just more loving and accepting of people for them, for who they are, that they're automatically just going to love us
Right.
and accept our friendship. Because no doubt, a lot of times people will hold it against us that we don't. In other words, if we don't agree with their lifestyle, then we don't agree with them. Like we don't love them, and there's not a lot we can do about that. I mean, the best we can is hold to our convictions, love them as best as we can, and now in other cases, it will be enough
Yeah.
for people to know. You know what? I can see that because of your convictions as a biblical Christian, that you're not going to be able to agree with my lifestyle in this area. But I can also tell that you really love and accept me. And you don't hold me to some kind of a different standard or worse standard as other sinners in society. So
Yeah, that we're just going to do our best to offend people for the right reasons.
Yeah, right.
The gospel has enough offense in itself
That's
to
right.
do the work. Hopefully, I'm not getting in the way with superiority, with pride, with
good way to say it.
judgmentalism.
Yeah, it's a great way to describe it.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Well, Mark, Dad, you spent a lot of time talking about propaganda in your sermon. Your sermon was filled with propaganda.
Whoa.
You called it the jet fuel of tribalism. That
Yeah.
is good language. I'm sure you stole it from someone.
probably did.
And the idea of propaganda, we've heard about echo chambers too, where we're all hearing the same things. What are some of the and I'm going to hold a stopwatch here. You can't just
right.
preach your sermon again. But
Yeah.
what are some of the ways to recognize propaganda and echo chambers? What are some distinctives of it? Give us the cliff notes from your sermon, and then we'll talk for a few minutes on how do we get outside of these echo chambers.
Sure. So, for sure, it revises history. So, you when you're not presenting or you're not hearing the full data,
The full truth.
and you can't always give all the full. Sometimes conversations are limited, sermons are limited as far as time, unless you're Austin. But I mean, to say, for example, that that slavery was really exclusively at the hands of the white man, and no doubt, white race-based slavery is so terrible, and yeah, it was so terrible in this country. But then you have to back out all of these facts about slavery in like every civilization, in all races, and it's way bigger than just a white man. So it kind of just revises history. And so I guess the quick way to answer your question is when you're seeing that not all of the facts are coming out, it's more about tribes than truth.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's good.
Yeah, and then, like we've already said, when a person isn't evaluated based on themselves and their character and their lifestyle, they're evaluated based on this particular people group that they're in. Then obviously that's a propaganda kind of a situation.
Oh, that's good. Austin, you may have mentioned this before, but in talking about the difference between like the news shows where it's just a short clip versus like some of these podcasts like
long form.
Joe Rogan or some of
Yep.
these longer form podcasts where it seems like propaganda works better in the short form conversation, like the real quick gotcha. The sound bites, the grandstanding that our politicians do when the cameras are on. It seems like propaganda is easier when you do it quick like that.
That's such a great example. Last week I mentioned a person I've always struggled with is Bill Maher. Just his attitude, especially towards Christians, and man, it's just kind of hard to like that guy, especially when he starts talking about Christians.
Right.
Like, God help me. But it was a podcast about, I think it was Rogan podcast, like 90 minutes to 2 hours that I listened to, that I actually realized I agree with a bunch of stuff Bill Maher thinks. Yeah. So I would never pick that up, and little nuggets, little talking points that...
Right. And usually it's the short stuff that gets the most views. Like, I can't believe this person said that. They must be the worst person on the earth. And then you listen to him talk for a couple hours, and then it's like, oh, wow, okay, I disagree with him here, but he's a reasonable person.
Yeah. Right. Now, it didn't change a bunch of other stuff he says that I just, it's just too bad. I pray for him, actually.
Sure.
I even agree with him on a number of issues.
Well, we are so addicted to salacious, like sexy headlines, and it seems like that.
meat.
Yeah, that's what sells, and it seems like it's a great way to kind of indoctrinate people into a propaganda-driven tribe. Is little bite-sized nuggets that just plant enough of a seed in somebody's mind to let their wildest imagination run free and let them think whatever they want to think about said issue. That's one reason I really do like Joe Rogan podcast, and I really do like a lot of these other long-form discussions with secular comedians or secular talk hosts or whatever, because it does show what these people do actually believe. It's not a 45-second little debate between a Christian and an agnostic on Fox and Friends. It's actually a long-form discussion, and oftentimes what I have seen is in long-form discussions that people have with people that on the surface it looks like they may disagree with, in the end, when people are actually confronted with a good Socratic method of debate or actually good questions, a level playing field, not feeling like they have to have this sense of one-upmanship or this sense of like, oh, you've been burned, people are much more reasonable than we'll give them credit for. Even the flaming right wing or flaming left wing freak shows that we would look at and say they have nothing to add to this discussion at all. If we can sit down and actually talk, we'll make a lot of progress. I remember when everything with George Floyd and the whole BLM stuff was going down, I had some friends on social media that were posting a lot of things that I did not agree with. And I remember thinking, they were online, they were posting a bunch of this stuff, and it was just, I was disheartened by it. I was like really kind of heartbroken by it. And I remember me and another friend, we sat down with them and we talked for about 3 hours in a bakery. And it was so telling because so much of what they were writing on Facebook and what they were posting on Instagram was not actually what they believe. But Facebook and Instagram is a horrible, horrible, horrible avenue or media way to share what it is you actually, it's not a long form dialogue. I found so much in my life that when it comes to actually convincing someone or actually seeing what someone believes, simply reading what they have to say on Facebook in 160 characters is not even actually what it is that they're actually holding to and what they actually believe in. And it's important to actually have dialogue. I love social media. I think it's important. I think it's valuable. But boy, oh boy, has it created wicked tribes and echo chambers that devastate our society, that cause a lot of talking past each other, and that cause a lot of fights that don't need to happen if we just sat down, shut our mouths, and listened twice as much as we talked.
And it does seem with our social media that the more these things happen, these controversial things, the more I will unfriend people that don't align with my views, and so then I'm creating my own echo chamber. It gets worse and worse.
That's another thing. I don't mean to be a hobby horse here, but
Here he goes.
Okay, so I'm seeing that a lot right now,
Yeah.
and even some of my friends, and if they're listening to this, I mean, you guys know this is a spiel I've been going on. How many people are unfriending people that are posting like Jane's Revenge or stuff on pro-choice? I do not agree that we should be unfriending people who have differing views than us. I remember back during the election, and I went on Facebook and I saw how many of my friends liked Donald Trump and how many of my friends liked like Hillary. It was remarkable. I had like 4 friends. It's like that's a clear example of echo chambers. And in order, I believe, from a Christian's perspective, in order to gain ground in these cultural battles for the gospel, we need to engage in conversation, not shut it down. And one of the ways in which we can engage in conversation is by being friends with them, reading what it is they have to see, what they have to say. I think unfriending them is not wise. I don't think it's prudent. I don't think it's what Jesus would do. I think he'd invite people out to coffee. I think he'd have discussions with them and not write them off as radicals, fringe, freak shows. I completely disagree with people unfriending folks.
Well, and could it be that it is a sign of tribalism?
It totally is.
That causes somebody, I'm not saying in every case, but in many cases, what will cause them to unfriend someone is the particular cause, particular group, whatever it is that's the rift, has become more important than the relationship for the gospel.
That's right.
I also think
right.
it's uncomfortable to see something that does something visceral in me. I don't like it. Makes me feel really uncomfortable, challenges my thinking. And so it's easier to just see Austin and Joe's posts because I agree with them. But it also makes us dumber.
Well, and
because we don't engage with the other side.
Well, and also it not only reinforces a tribalistic attitude, but it also shuts down any potential of being able to understand what somebody thinks because we're only hearing from our own side. I want to see, and I do this. I know what you believe about Roe v. Wade. I know what you believe. I know what you believe. I'm not so concerned to hear your guys' arguments, but I am fascinated what my roommate from college has to say, who is a black gay man, and what he has to say about Roe v. Wade. That's interesting to me because this guy says that he's a believer and he holds to a completely different worldview than I do. And if I truly want to win people who are similar to him for the gospel, I need to know what it is that they think so I know how to respond in season and out of season. I need to know how to talk to these people. I don't need to unfriend them. That's not what Jesus would do. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Thanks, Austin. It's helpful. Well, we are winding down on our time here, but 2 more questions for you guys. One is, any final thoughts or words on tribalism that you didn't get in? So think about that. And then as you're thinking about that, what are some scriptures? We're people of the book, right? We love the book. We love the community that God's put us in. What are some scriptures that have spoken to your heart on this topic of tribalism or community? Maybe it made it into your sermon, maybe not. So let's start with any closing thoughts on tribalism that you didn't get in yet? Anything burning on your heart?
I wish I could have done a little more maybe on Sunday on this idea of how tribalism, I think, stems a lot from like the hyper-individualization of our society. And I wish I would have done more on that, and I wish I could have spent more time studying on that because I think it's fascinating how the hyper-individual society of America has really just wavelengths that now we see. And they go into almost every one of these cross-cultural series topics we're doing. This hyper-individual theme is just in every single one of them. And we have to be careful as Christians to not be hyper-individualistic, but communityistic. Is that the right word? Community-based.
Communal.
Communal. Yeah. That's better. Yeah.
That's good.
And so I would challenge our listeners. Are you in a tribalistic attitude right now lately? Have you been struggling with identifying with what you're against than what you are for, or have you been practicing the way of Jesus in community? And so the scripture that I was hung up on through my studies was just simply just Romans 12, 9 through 19, where Paul is just spelling out, man, go through these things and live these practices and do these things, and they're all based on a humble attitude. Humility was, as our friend Eric Swan would say, humility is the secret sauce. And I just think
sermon, Eric.
Eric kills it. But I think that to me was something I'm still wrestling with. Man, am I a man of humility that practices these things I see in the Word, and specifically these codes of conduct out of Romans 12? Am I doing that, or am I just hoping that I'm doing that? Am I actually being a doer of the Word, or am I just listening to the Word? And so I did challenge the listeners, as you're thinking of this, and you're thinking about, man, am I tribalistic or not? Put reflection back on the Word. Man, am I practicing the Word, or am I just following the way of Twitter? So that's
good.
Some things to think about for sure.
Thanks, Joe.
I think along with that, maybe saying it a little bit differently, but coming out of the same kind of that worldview, which is it's about what I think. The individual, the sovereign self, is this whole idea of how tribalism is also fueled by this conviction that my lived experience is authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's not so much what is truth, it's what I feel, it's what I think about things, and I think we do need to listen to people's experiences. Like it's anti-Christian to not listen and to take somebody's story very, very seriously. So this is what I wish I could have got into. I didn't have time, but but when I say this, I don't want to say we don't listen. We should listen. We should be the best at bearing burdens and being there for people. But this idea today that, okay, because I think it or feel it, it's what makes it true. And that's just so dangerous, because a lot of times, I'll speak for myself, what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking about a situation is, I hate to admit it, often not true, right? And so I think what's happening here is we're doing the exact backwards of what logic, or let's take a good psychologist that's trying to help somebody with phobias. Every spider's not out to kill you. Every snake's not out to kill you. So there's this thing called exposure therapy where they'll actually try to, put a spider in your hand or make you eat out of a bowl of chips at a party because you're not going to likely get Ebola. You know what I mean? So just because you did get sick at a party, or just because a snake did bite you one time, doesn't mean that it's this exposure therapy thing. So, but what tribalism does is it does the opposite. It says all men are out to do this. All white people are out to do this. All this group are out to do this. And so then poor little Susie on the playground, who's been told by, whoever her mom about this male propaganda, they're all out to get her. So then when Billy Bob on that first day of class, he's going to be who Billy Bob typically, because we have him in every school, right? And he's going to be mean. He's going to be mean to her. And then she's going to connect the dots and say, it's not just this mean boy to me. This is what all men. So tribalism is very, it makes the problem worse because it takes very real hurtful situations and it makes it this bigger issue that really isn't even valid. It's all snakes are out to bite you. All men are out to do this. All cis, whatever it might be. So that was one thing I would have liked to mention.
Helpful.
Sorry, that was kind of long.
It's okay.
Yeah, one thing passage of scripture that I have been trying to keep on the forefront of my mind this entire series has been Proverbs 15. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And then 15:4, a soothing tongue is a tree of life, but perversion in it crushes the spirit. I oftentimes recognize in my own life that I feel like you guys have all been with me very graciously, and sometimes the way in which sometimes I feel like when I say something, the way I say it isn't necessarily the best way to say it. And that's something I'm constantly trying to work on, constantly trying to take before the Lord and get refined in me. But it's true. I mean, even if you feel rock solid about what it is that is right or what it is that is true, the way in which we present it can oftentimes come across as not incredibly productive or even beneficial. And so those texts have been very important for me. One area that I wish I could have done a little bit more work on this week is the insane need for Christians to be curious. I think it's very important to understand how we got to this time in history philosophically. When we were doing the LGBT discussion, I spent a lot of time on Alfred Kinsey and Sigmund Freud, a lot of time on the philosophy that undergirds a lot of this kind of thought. This past week, I did quite a bit of work with Jean-Jacques Rousseau and some of the beliefs that he has in regards to individual human identity and the way in which that Rousseauian philosophy has created an oppressor-oppression type dichotomy that we see resembled very clearly in our society today. And I think it's important to understand how these thoughts came to be in order to understand how we can minister to them appropriately. Because if we can understand the thoughts that undergird a lot of these philosophies, we then will know how to speak the language in a compelling way to convince these people that there is a better way of living than the way that they think is true and right. And not only that, we'll be able to show them that the standard or the philosophy that they're consciously or unconsciously believing just doesn't make sense logically when we run it out to the fullest extent. And so it's important in my mind for Christians to be curious about this kind of stuff. I think this is just a general rule that I have. Again, with the whole stuff going on with BLM and everything back then, I kind of made my own rule that for every book I read about a Christian worldview on race, I wanted to read one that was not from a Christian perspective. So like White Fragility, that was a book that I didn't agree with, but I felt like it would be beneficial to read just so I could understand what people do believe, even if it didn't make sense to me. It's important, and Christians ought to be curious, and we ought to be able to speak the language and know how to communicate in a way that's compelling, that can make the gospel appear so incredibly beautiful to everyone. And so I wish I would have done a little bit more work on that this week, just about the curiosity that I think we need to have, and also the humility in that endeavor. So,
Dad, any scriptures that have informed that stood out to you?
Yeah, Galatians 3. I mean, that's just priceless. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for all of you are one in Christ. Those were pretty radical tribal groups. Like I shared in the sermon here, I don't think we have any idea how ugly that tribalism was. I mean, we see a lot of bad stuff today, but the Jew, Gentile, male, female, slave, free, this was some messed up stuff, and to see what the Holy Spirit did in unifying the church the way they did, and not to make these issues grievance issues, not to turn them into oppressed and oppressor groups, but to go big on, like if Christians, I don't like when people say, if Christians today would, but I'm going to say that if Christians today would like see the tribe of the church, the body of Christ, as just the ultimate tribe, and okay, we can agree to disagree on a bunch of lesser things, important things maybe, but lesser things. Man, that'd make a big difference in how the world sees our love for one another.
Yeah. Joe stole mine. Romans 12. I love that. But I just think of Paul's words to the churches, especially in his letters, Romans 12, Ephesians 4-5, Colossians 3, about casting off the old nature, and how, that involves sexual sin, but it also involves like hostility, anger, wrath, slander, malice, all these things. Throw those away. Those do not belong in the church. Hey, instead, clothe yourselves with humility, compassion, kindness, sacrificial love, forgiveness, gentleness, fruits of the Spirit. These sorts of things. That needs to be the aroma of what we're about. That's what binds our group together. So, guys, thanks so much. This is a great conversation. I'm edified. I'm encouraged. I'm challenged. Appreciate y'all. Thanks, Phil and Tim, for all you guys do for digging deeper.
Resources? Any resources?
Go ahead and recommend what you got.
Yeah. Well, of course, we've talked about Thaddeus Williams. This is the third or fourth week we've talked about his book, I think. So, Andy Stanley has a new book out.
Yeah, not in it to win it.
In it to win it.
How
Excellent.
choosing sides, sidelines the church.
Real quick, he talks about how we have more in common with another believer, even if we may have nothing in common politically.
Right.
That might sound crazy, but that's a good thing to think about. Like, that's true. Like, Joe could be like way, left leaning politically. I'm way right, but like, and I might think, oh, that just pits us as being so different. Well, if we're brothers in Christ, that's what matters. Anyway, so not in it to win it. And one other thing, the Colson Center has a series of short videos called "What Would You Say?" And they're awesome, like 3-minute videos on all these little topics. And I highly recommend that series.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Joe, looks like you got some books
Oh,
queued up there.
I was just looking. I came across a podcast. It was just a sermon actually from John Mark Comer.
Oh,
He
cool.
did on tribalism, and it was called "Community of a Tight Knit, Loving Relationship in a Culture of Tribalism." So real good. It was back in 2021, and I recommend. Want to listen to a different person from Portland going through tribalism and that society. I think it was a pretty good talk.
I know somewhat unrelated to this topic, but John Tyson has a great pastoral letter to his church on Roe v. Wade, and I just love the way he navigated that with his church in New York. It was brilliant.
Yeah,
Check
it was
that
good.
out. John Tyson, pastoral letter pertaining to
Church of the
Roe v.
City,
Wade. Roe v. Wade. Austin, any books?
Oh man, well this series, I mean, I can give maybe a few that I've kind of used for the series. I used one called Cynical Theories. It's written by two agnostics, Helen Pluckros and James Lindsay. Pretty good book. It's just kind of a examination of our current culture from a not from a Christian perspective. I think it's interesting, and then of course from a Christian perspective, a book that I know you're a big fan of and you're a big fan of. You probably read it as well, but it is The Rise and Triumph of Modern Self. Carl Trueman, and then his newest book, which is kind of the smaller
dumbed down version.
Simplified version.
Strange
Which
New
that's a
World.
good book too.
Layman's
Well,
terms,
I started it yesterday. I'm on chapter 3 now.
And what's it called?
A Strange New World.
Strange New World.
It's great, and we're gonna do a specialty life group in Rogue River through Strange New World come fall, because it is such an important. Again, evangelistically, it is so important to see where people are coming from, and I want to equip people. To know how we can engage with this culture, and we need to know what kind of world we're living in.
And
Yeah.
Truman's so well read.
And the thing I like about him is as beneficial as Cynical Theories is and was from kind of a secular worldview. Truman does such a great job of taking secular principles and ideas and then showing how the Bible interacts to these principles in such a compelling and beautiful way. And he almost just like connects the two. It's very good. It's the most important book. It's the most important book and the most important work, I think, of this generation, honestly.
High praise.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, hey, guys, thanks so much for those recommendations. Hey, if you, listener, have been with us this whole time, props to you. You are awesome. Thanks for hanging on. Some great conversations.
Hard to keep that one condensed.
I know. It's really good, and you guys appreciate your sermons. Appreciate all the work you guys are putting into these difficult conversations.
man. You too,
hey,
Tyler.
Stop it. Stop
Come
it.
on.
Stop it. But no, seriously, it's a lot of work, and I just commend you guys for what you're doing. And you too, audience. Thanks so much.
We're at Redwood this week.
Redwood this week.
One
if you're
service,
watching
10 o'clock.
If you're watching this Digging Deeper episode over the next couple days, one service at Redwood, July 3rd at 10 o'clock. We hope to see you there.
With food,
With
With
food.
and baptisms.
Baptisms.
It's a whole shebang.
Dutch
What
Brothers
else?
Coffee.
Oh, what?
There you
Dude,
go.
it's
I'm
going to be
gonna be there.
awesome.
Freebies, giveaways.
Whoa. Oh, right. All right.
iPads.
You get a car. You get a car.
Well, hey, we're landing the plane. God bless you guys. We'll see you soon.